The important thing to remember about my palette is that I use a warm and cool of each of the primary colors for the most part. And then sometimes I experiment with another color and throw it in there once in a while just to see if I like it, if I might want to add something more to my palette. But otherwise, if you have a good warm and cool of each of the primary colors, you're going to be in good shape. These are the brushes that I use consistently. These are my major brush styles and categories. Right now I'm putting in a nice overall tone to my panel. The reason for that is when I was analyzing the actual photo that we were using, this painting was done for the Paint Together back in March. When I was analyzing the photo reference that we used, there were a lot of greens, and this is Colorado. It's a creek up near where we lived in Rye, Colorado, near San Isabel Park. And the dirt there tends to have a reddish tone to it. And that works so beautifully. It's such a harmonizing color for all the greens and the other color tones that are there in the landscape. That's why I decided to start with an overall color like that on my panel. So that's a mix of the transparent oxide red and transparent oxide yellow to give me that nice reddish brown tone under there, kind of like a burnt sienna look to it, or maybe a raw sienna look to it. It's not just with the greens that are in the landscape. In the creek itself, there are a lot of rocks in there that are red and warm yellows and all of that. So that also helps to establish the overall warm tone of the creek that I'm going to be painting. Now I'm just kind of playing with some of the different, and really I should caution what I did there with the bush and adding in those little leaves and details. That was, generally speaking, premature. Usually I don't start to add in that kind of detail right in the beginning, but I'm kind of getting a feeling for the colors and the textures and the shapes, the spaces, the sizes that I'm going to be using throughout the painting. So I don't follow any particular system when I'm painting. Each painting is kind of a unique endeavor for me. And so with this one, that's just what my instincts told me to do. So it's not necessarily best practice or a good thing for everyone to try right off the bat, because then I have to work around those details, or I have to not worry about losing them if I do a vigorous brushstroke across them. So when I'm putting detail like that in at the very beginning, I have to be conscious of the idea that that detail is not sacred. It's something that I can get rid of, I can wipe off, I can brush over, and it won't hurt my feelings at all to do that. That's what I'm thinking about when I put in that kind of detail right off. A lot of the greens, I have the warm greens down near the bottom with those more yellowish greens that are in there to really play against those reds. And then I also have the cool greens off in the bushes behind, or the plants that are behind, back towards the backside of the upper backside of the painting, because I want to have different color temperatures playing in there. So I have the warm greens and the cool greens. And I'm constantly trying to change that up throughout the painting, placing a cool near a warm, or a cool on top of a warm, or vice versa. A constant change in color temperature in the little spaces that I'm working with and the colors that I'm working with. Okay, so you can see here that I'm really playing now with getting the feeling of water. And so sometimes we can get that kind of a feeling just with the direction of the brush strokes. Taking those brush strokes and creating a lot of downward motion with it, that helps to create that idea of reflection and the reflective quality of water. And then I can come back in with some little rocks and little tiny rapids and that sort of thing, little ripples in the water that will also help to define the water as water. At this point in the painting, my trusted second eye came over to visit and give me a critique. And she said that I was feeling pretty good about this. I liked the way the colors were working and so much about the painting. And I was thinking, well, you know, it is kind of a simple study and maybe I'm about done. And she came in and said, I don't like it. I said, what don't you like? I don't know. I don't like it. And so she went on to tell me that the river was feeling as if it didn't have any definite banks to it. So it didn't really feel like necessarily a river. It was more like a bog or just a patch of water, dark water there. The tree, she said, felt like it was ghostly. I didn't have enough definition in the foreground with things. And when I get an idea in my mind, it seems like I become set and I think, yes, I've done it. This is great. And then suddenly my whole perspective is turned upside down. My world is shattered. And at least that's what it feels like for that brief moment until I realize, oh, boy, howdy. You sure do have a tendency, Bill, to get visions of grandeur when you're painting. It's those little aspects of the painting that appeal to me so much that suddenly take on some greater quality to them than is actually there. And that's why I have to have somebody that comes in and grounds me back into reality and helps me to see what I've been missing, where my brain filled in the parts that weren't working so that now I can make them work. An important thing to think about as artists is the way that we actually see. It's not our eyes taking all this information and just letting all that light go through and create an image in our brains. Our brain translates what our eyes are seeing. So everything that's in front of us, when we're painting especially, our brain can take the information that we see in front of us, and if we don't like what we see, it can change it. It can make it better. It can make it the way that we want to see it. So that's where we can be painting and have this very glaring, obvious problem in our painting, or a branch, let's say a rock that's just stuck right in the center of our painting, bullseyed in there, bright against everything else, and yet for some reason as we were going along, we didn't even notice it. It's so obvious once it's pointed out to us, but what happens is our brains, while we're painting, take that information. We might have glanced and realized, oh, yep, I need to do something about that, forget about it, or not really think too much about it because we're engrossed in some other area. And so our brain takes and changes it for us before we've actually changed it in actuality. And then it's no longer such a glaring problem, and we forget about it. We don't notice it anymore. It's not obvious to us. Having a mirror to look back into, stepping back away from our paintings quite a ways, having somebody else come in and look at our painting, all of that changes the perspective and allows our brain to, in essence, get rid of the false mask that it's placed over our painting, and to allow us to see more clearly again, to see it in a fresh, more clear perspective. That's really what that's all about. It's letting our brain now see what it hasn't let us see for a long time because we created a false illusion or false reality about what it was that we were doing. So I'm putting in little refinements here and there, just increasing some of the fun little aspects of the painting that bring a richness to it. Putting in some shadows along the side of a spot of color and transforming that spot of color into a rock that has three-dimensional form. Taking more branches and putting them into the background and in other areas to increase the energy and the interest in that area. Bringing in brighter, stronger, more saturated spots of color to pick things up. And so when I put in little spots of color, like maybe an orange next to a lavender and some greens and other colors like that, I'm not just putting in random arbitrary colors here and there just to sparkle things up, because I still want my colors to harmonize with one another. So if there's a green nearby, I might come in with a color that's more on the red side of things, not necessarily bright red, like a fire engine red, but something in that range of color so that it helps those greens to pop even more. The greens now take on a more green significance to them. So that's it. I'm thinking when I put in little spots of color, first of all, I like spots of warmth in there, with a bright orange or a bright red, something that warmth really pulls forward and gives the painting a lot of punch. But it also needs to be tempered by a lot of little cool colors in there as well. So the lavenders, colors that are more on the blue side, placing those one next to the other, like a spot of orange next to a lavender. That juxtaposition of the cool and warm colors really livens things up, makes it more energetic and engaging. Putting in some of those little highlights like that, I don't want to suddenly do that everywhere, but a spot here and there I don't even have to put a branch going out to those. The mind will fill that in. The mind of the viewer will fill that in. We don't want to get back to our minds filling things in and having a mistake there. But that same concept that we were talking about with our own brains, that can happen with the viewer as well, but in a good way, where we allow their imagination to participate in the creation of the image that's in front of them. So rather than putting in every little detail, like a branch coming out that's obvious, that everyone can see, and then putting a leaf there, especially in a small image like that, but even with some of my larger images, I can come in with a spot of leaf color like that, a bright leaf, and the brain will know what it's associated with and will have no problem whatsoever with not seeing a branch there. And that's based in actuality. If we go out, when we're out on location, when we're looking at the scene in front of us, we can see a bush and there might be a branch there that we don't actually see. We might see a leaf sticking out there, and we'd have to really look at it very closely to see the branch that it's attached to, because that branch just happens to be mostly blending in with all of the values around it. So the branch kind of gets lost, but the leaf is all lit up like a spotlight, and so it stands out. So we can do that sort of thing and get away with it because it actually happens in nature. And that's why when we're painting like this, we don't have to spell out everything. We don't have to put in every little detail. And it actually is more fun for the viewer when we don't, when we do leave some of those things out. Now, if it's way off somewhere, and there are times when we can do that and it does not make sense at all. And if we feel that way, then it does help to go and give some clarity to it so that the viewer is not confused. We don't want to rationalize something that's not working with the idea that, hey, I can get away with this because it could happen in nature. There are a lot of things in nature that I see, a particular sunset, that I think, wow, that is beautiful, but I could never paint it because it would look fake. It just wouldn't look natural. There are some things in nature that don't look natural. They are natural because it's happening and I'm seeing it happening, but to put it into a painting, it would look like I was forcing it. And I don't want that in my work. So there are times when, yes, we do have to define an area more than another area, but we can kind of feel that as we go. And hopefully our second eye or our mirror, our change of perspective will help us to see that if we're not seeing it. So in the background, I felt like it needed some cooling down a bit so that it wasn't such a dark hole back there. And there's nothing wrong with having a dark background overall. But I thought that bringing in some coolness back into that background would help then to push our bush forward a little bit. If I put a cool in the background and juxtapose the warm, like in this case, the bush on top of that then helps to push that bush towards the viewer. All those warm colors against those cooler colors will really, unless those cooler colors are, let's say, a bright blue that's saturated, then that bright blue is just going to, boom, come pushing right out at us. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this is a very grayed down, just a cooler dark that's going back in there, rather than the warmer dark. And that way, instead of the bush kind of blending into the background, it'll help to push that forward. Now, the same thing can be accomplished with just a dark, so we have the light bush against a very dark background, but I wanted to help the two to kind of blend a little bit more and have some integration in there, rather than just a dark and a light that are an obvious contrast of values. I wanted more of a contrast of color temperatures. So I'm changing up from a contrast of values more to a contrast of color temperatures. And then I can come back in and get a few more of those little leaves that I talked about before that are out away from the bush and place them on top of those cools to help push some of those cools back in the background again. Those are the things I think about ahead of time that I'm going to have to do, because otherwise then those cools are starting to feel like they're coming on top of the bush, and it's a little bit hard to see the separation between the two at the moment. But we can come in fairly easily after we've gotten those established, those cool colors in the background. We can come in and put something on top of that. It's the idea of overlap and putting something on top of it that will help to then put those back into their place in the background more. And if they end up not feeling like they're going back enough, I can always darken them up again too. But it's that experimentation, just thinking, and it's also a little bit in reaction to the tree. I'm taking some of those tree colors so that instead of changing the color of the tree, which I probably could have done, I'm taking some of the colors from the tree and putting them into the background so that it then feels like it actually belongs in the painting. The tree belongs in the painting because those colors are being moved through other spaces in the painting. In painting, viewers, generally speaking, don't actually want us as artists to define everything. They don't look at paintings the way that they look at photographs. They don't want to look at paintings the way they look at photographs. None of us do. We want to look at a painting and realize that it's a painting. We might get really enamored with the skill of an artist in that he can make a painting look like a photograph, but it's a fairly short-lived admiration. Really what we want is for the artist to succeed in creating something that doesn't look like a photograph and yet is mesmerizing, that is wonderful and fun and beautiful. That's what we really want to see the artist succeed at. Like Van Gogh. He's still one of the most beloved and celebrated artists in the history of art, and there's nothing realistic or detailed or photographic about his work. It's just so dynamic and full of energy and life and color, and we celebrate that. We love that. So the more we can simplify and still maintain our idea, our concept, what it was that enamored us with our subject in the first place, the more we can do that and still simplify, the better we're going to be. Okay, so the more we can simplify and get away with, the more we're going to enjoy it and the more the viewer is going to enjoy it. That doesn't mean we have to get all the way down to being non-objective or abstract artists or color-filled or anything. That has its place, but that is not why I paint. I love nature. I love the way nature looks. I love the feeling that I get from it. I just want to capture as simply as I can what it was about that particular scene that gave me that feeling, that gave me that joy. So remember, if we want a color, like let's say we're putting in a warm bush, and we want the warmth of those colors to feel even warmer, but our colors won't allow us to do that, then we can put a cool behind it. And the cool behind it will help the warm to feel warmer. If we want to make something that's light feel even lighter, but we can't go any lighter, then we can put a dark behind it, and the contrast of those will make that light feel much lighter. Those are some of the contrasts that we can use to create that change. Have a great time painting your own creek and get out there and enjoy nature. Have fun with it all. And
Happy painting.